What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. A very special edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast tonight, and you will definitely hear more editions of the show like this in regards to your favorite football team, my favorite football team, the Buffalo Bills. The season starts tomorrow, week 1, preseason. The Buffalo Bills take on the Indianapolis Colts tomorrow, the game at New Era Field in Orchard Park, New York. So it's always nice to start the preseason off with a home game. I think that is actually, it makes things a little bit more comfortable for me. Does the preseason really matter? No. No, it does not. So let's just answer that question. As far as whether the game result, a win or a loss, matters, it really doesn't. But there are four glorified scrimmages where we as fans and as media can see who is actually ready to take part and ultimately take over certain roles within this team. And you see players that you normally wouldn't see on an NFL team, and you also see players that eventually will prove that they too also, quote-unquote, belong in the National Football League, playing with an NFL team, playing under an NFL team, wearing an NFL uniform, wearing NFL hoodies and all that stuff. So this is an important game. There's no doubt about it. Whether they win or lose is not important, but it's an important game in the sense that players on this team are really chomping at the bit. There's some really crucial position battles, namely at wide receiver. You got guys like Ray Ray McCloud. Andre Roberts is making an impact out there in training camp. You have quarterback, not battle, but a quarterback that's trying to make the team in Tyree Jackson. And you have some late-round draft choices that I really enjoy watching and that I've enjoyed watching thus far, namely Darryl Johnson, the defensive end, a seventh-round draft choice, and Tommy Sweeney, a tight end that was drafted in the 7th round in this past year's draft by the Buffalo Bills. All four of those players are players that I am most definitely keeping an eye on. They're four guys that I think can make this team with a very impressive preseason performance. And they're four positions of need, really. Four positions where you need depth there. You need depth at quarterback. You need depth at the wide receiver position. You need depth at tight end and at defensive end, especially in the 2019 NFL. And I think that there's spots on this team that are there for the taking that other guys will lose due to someone taking those spots. And that's the name of the game this time of year, whether it's training camp, whether it's preseason. The notion that heading into training camp, this guy's definitely going to make the team. Not necessarily. We've seen that. We have seen guys that you would not expect to get cut during the training camp process. Fred Jackson. A few years ago, he gets cut. I remember the moment Fred Jackson got cut, I got the notification on my phone. No one saw that coming. No one on the beat saw that coming. No Buffalo Bills insider, no journalist. Nobody saw that coming because it was Fred Jackson. He was like the favorite uncle of every Buffalo Bills fan that was my age and favorite, brother of everybody that, is around my dad's age. So everybody loved Fred Jackson. And seeing a guy like that get cut, that lends me to believe that anybody could get cut. So that was a few years ago, but there's tons of examples. It's safe to say that across the National Football League, there's a lot of examples. But Fred Jackson is the one that really sticks out to me because I didn't see it coming. So we could see that potentially this offseason. Who knows? And that's why these games are played. It's an audition to make the 53-man roster. It's an audition to see who is up to snuff, who can actually make a difference on this Buffalo Bills roster. And Tyree Jackson, when I heard that Buffalo went out and signed him immediately after the draft was over, I was actually in Batavia. I was at Batavia Downs, and Batavia Downs Casino, shout out to them. watching the tail end of the draft, wondering when Tyree Jackson was going to get drafted. And seeing that draft come to a conclusion and to know that Tyree Jackson wasn't drafted, I was a little bit disappointed for him because I know how hard he works, I know how committed he is, and I know what he did for the University of Buffalo football program. He was a true leader on that field for them. He led the charge, so to speak, of that offense, and really was the engine that kept running for that team, and shouldered a lot of pressure for Lance Leipold on that roster. And knowing that he didn't get drafted, I thought was a little bit indicative of the national media kind of overlooking or overlooking not just him, but looking too much into the MAC championship game where they had a big lead and they blew it at halftime. After halftime, the second half was a complete catastrophe. But those things happen. I don't think that should have dictated whether Tyree Jackson should or should not have got drafted by an NFL team. But I am thankful that he didn't get drafted by an NFL team because the team that signed him, the team that went out and brought him in, was the Buffalo Bills. And I think that it made a lot of sense for Buffalo to kick the tires on this idea and to ultimately pursue this path of bringing Tyree Jackson into the fold, because you got three quarterbacks. You got Josh Allen, you got Matt Barkley, and you got Tyree Jackson. If Josh Allen, God forbid, goes down, if Matt Barkley, God forbid, goes down, you don't have to change the offense a whole lot to get acclimated to Tyree Jackson. He has very similar skills to that of Josh Allen. He's big, he's strong, he can move in the pocket, maybe not as well as Josh Allen can. Maybe he's not as accurate as a Matt Barkley, but I think he's a solid third option who could potentially be a viable backup quarterback in this league. Whether he's a starter or not, I'm not going to give him that much praise because I don't know. I haven't seen that yet at this level. If he plays really well as a backup in this league, then we can say, that he could be a starter. If he plays really well as a backup in games that matter in this league, in the NFL, then we could say maybe he has the capability of being a starter, but he has not done that yet. He hasn't had the opportunity to do that yet. Until he does, I can't say for certain that he'll be a starter, but I can say based on his physical talent, his attributes, his strength, his savviness, I think he does have room to grow, and I think he's willing to reach that precipice of his game, and I look forward to seeing him play tomorrow. He's a player to watch for me for that reason, and I'd love to see him in the room as a QB3. I think there's a lot to learn for him, and I think there's a lot to learn from him, from guys like Josh Allen and guys like Matt Barkley. So we'll see. This isn't the first time Buffalo kicked the tires on a UB quarterback. A few years ago, Joe Licata was brought in on a tryout and through in training camp practices. Ultimately, that didn't work out, but Tyree Jackson just might. So something to keep our eyes out on for sure. Another player that I mentioned as a player to watch for me is Ray Ray McCloud. I've really enjoyed what I've seen from him this training camp. The speed is there. The route running ability is there. And his hands, most importantly, his hands are there. He's made a lot of great catches throughout camp thus far. I think I wouldn't be the first to say, actually, that his training camp performance has kind of shocked me. He's somewhat burst onto the scene, and he's been somebody that has been making an impact here in training camp throughout the whole process. And I think if he makes a big training camp, or not a big training camp, a big performance in the preseason, if he shows up in the preseason, then we can really legitimize that performance in training camp. And it's not that I don't legitimize a training camp performance, but I think when you can put it to the field and bring it to your game as far as playing an actual NFL opponent other than the defense that you practice with, I think that'll say a lot. And I think Ray Ray really needs to show up tomorrow. I think a big performance for him would work wonders for his chances at making this team as the preseason weeks wear on. He needs to have a real strong preseason and just continue the momentum that he's already built, and to look forward to what the future holds for him. I really do. And another player that I mentioned, Tommy Sweeney, tight end, 7th-round player that Buffalo drafted out of Boston College. Buffalo drafted not one but 2 tight ends. Oftentimes people talk about the tight end that Buffalo ultimately traded up to pick, and that was Dawson Knox. I like Dawson Knox a lot, but I like Tommy Sweeney as well. Potentially, I see Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney both making this Buffalo Bills roster along with Tyler Kroft, who has the foot injury. which will kind of push out some of the blocking tight ends, Lee Smith, receiving tight ends, Jason Kroom. I just haven't seen enough from those guys. I've seen receiving capability and blocking capability from Tommy Sweeney. I think he's had a really great training camp, and much like Ray Ray McCloud, another guy that has had a great training camp, but you'd like to see him build on that. We would like to see him build on that, build that momentum, and carry it over to actual NFL preseason competition. Last but not least, Darryl Johnson, a guy that was drafted by Buffalo as well in the 7th round of the 2019 NFL Draft. Darryl Johnson's a big, big man. You see how big this guy's legs are, how long he is. I really love his punch off the line when the ball is snapped. He can move back the tackle, and I think he's a diamond in the rough for Buffalo. I really do. I look forward to seeing his impact during this preseason. Hopefully he can continue the impressive run that he's had. You see the Buffalo Bills shuffling their offensive line a little bit here and there, and Darryl Johnson really hasn't had many issues with that shuffle. You know, you'd think to yourself, if Buffalo's shifting their offensive line so much, you'd think maybe Darryl Johnson would have a bad day at the office, but he hasn't really had a bad day at the office yet. He hasn't had a standout, highlight reel great day at the office, but he's been far better than what I thought he would be as far as creating pressure and creating havoc in that pocket for the opposing quarterback. I think that's something that Johnson is, that's something that he specializes in, for sure. So, those are my players to watch for the Buffalo Bills preseason week 1 clash, but I am a little worried. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a little worried, and here's why. I'm a little bit worried about the Buffalo Bills to start the season due to the fact that Mitch Morse had another concussion here in training camp. He's in concussion protocol. This is a very valuable piece that was brought into the Buffalo Bills organization via free agency, and an expensive one. Mitch Morse is the highest paid center in the National Football League at a 4-year, $44 million deal. A lot of it was guaranteed, and I don't know the exact specifics on his deal, but I want to talk about Mitch Morse as a player, and really I'm very worried for the Bills with this news that he won't be ready, that he's not playing, that he's not practicing. I think that's very bad news. We've already seen some injuries alongside the line. Adrian Waddle, he is out for the entire season. Unfortunately, he is out. Spencer Long has had his fair share of injuries. We've already seen the Buffalo Bills move their right tackle, project tackle, 2nd-round pick Cody Ford has been moved over to right guard due to the injuries that the Buffalo Bills have had along the line. The way I see the line projecting right now is that Deion Dawkins, unfortunately, I do see, not to throw shade on this guy, but I do see Russell Bodine playing on this line, and I do see Spain, and I do see Ford, and I do see Ty Nsekhe, and if I didn't mention him already, Deion Dawkins playing on this line, and not in that order, but just throwing the names out of who I anticipate being on this line. And I don't know if that's a real great line, to be quite honest with you, and I have a lot of question marks about the line, because when you add this many new pieces on the line, they have to learn how to communicate with one another, communicate with their quarterback, communicate within the offense. And I saw some struggles during my time at training camp this season for the Buffalo Bills, representing me, myself, and I, and the Thomas Take Sports podcast, just going as an observer. I observed that the line is not as good as I thought it would be. And I think a lot of people are with me on that. So that's a situation to monitor. That's a situation that I think will hopefully get better, because if it doesn't, I think we'll see much of the same as far as their offensive performance. Josh Allen will be running for his life, and that's not something that I want to see. That's not something that you want to see. That's not something that anyone wants to see. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was my Buffalo Bills preseason week 1 preview. Plenty of players to keep our eye out on for tomorrow night's game, Thursday night. Buffalo Bills football season is back. Join the takeover. Follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. Join me on Spotify by following the Spotify channel. Subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Apple Podcasts as well. And you can also follow me on Instagram, Ryan Thomas Take. I've greatly enjoyed these last few weeks talking on the show with plenty of guests. Expect plenty more coming up.